We're going to talk today about basic relational needs, and as it relates to bonding and connection, what we talk to the girls about is really looking at what lies beneath, like what are the things that we are really longing for or needing or wanting relationally that is sometimes driving our different behaviors, and how can we begin to speak the same language and meet relational needs in relational ways. A lot of times the behaviors that we're seeing that are self-destructive in a lot of different ways are looking to address things, relational needs that are underlying, but looking to address them in other ways, whether it's substances or other behaviors that are not meeting that relational need. And basically, at the core of us, there are a couple different crucial longings. One of them we talked about in our last parent weekend, competence and adulthood, and that is that we have this crucial longing for meaning and purpose for our lives. That like we understand or feel like we can fit in some way to a greater purpose outside of ourselves, and feel like our lives matter and that we are doing something that contributes to the world in a meaningful way. That maybe through our work or something we're making a difference and that we're having a purpose. The other crucial human longing at our core is the longing for belonging, for connection. That's something that we can't get away from as humans, those two things. We want to belong and connect and find acceptance, and then we want to find some way that we gather meaning and purpose for our lives. So today, what does connection really look like or mean? What are we wanting in connection? We're going to talk about bonding and attachment and all that stuff, but connection, what we're really looking for, we're looking to be accepted, to be loved, to connect to something outside of ourselves. And how do we do that? How do we really learn to connect and relate to people in healthy ways? In some ways we kind of take it for granted and we think like we know how to relate to people, we know how to connect, and yet there's an element of really connecting with people below the surface, a way of connecting to people that really meets those longings of our hearts, or that really kind of meets that need for connection that doesn't just come without intentionality. Think about just how rampant things like depression are in the world, that at their core a lot of times there's that loneliness and isolation, that people, even though we're interconnected and we rub shoulders with people all the time and we're not necessarily living in isolation, yet people feel that sense of isolation, feel disconnected, or feel a lack of connection with other people, even though they're in a crowded room, or have friends. But how do, with intentionality, we begin to learn to connect to people in different and more meaningful ways? This is something that one of the families that graduated just in the fall shared that was most impactful for them as parents, even outside of their relationship with their daughter and outside of trying to support her, but just that idea that as they were more intentional with their friendships and kind of looked at these different relational needs that we'll talk about, is that they began to incorporate that in their lives, in their relationships, in their friendships, their family connections, and even in their marriage relationship, of looking at, man, what is it that I need, and how do I look at myself as responsible to go and meet those needs, and not necessarily wait for other people to meet my needs for me and to notice what it is I'm needing, or to just kind of fill me up in a way, but recognizing that it's intentionality. It's this idea that I have to take seriously my relational needs and my ability to get them met. So it's kind of like speaking a language. That we're taught growing up, you learn to relate to people in English, right? Well, what if you want to make a Spanish-speaking friend? What are you going to do? Just kind of hope that they learn English well enough to talk to you? Or do you kind of learn their language as well? Or, what would it be like to try to be friends with somebody else where you just can't speak the same language and have to rely on other ways of connecting? But if you really want to connect with other people, it is like speaking a language. Similarly, if we learn about different things like taking care of our physical body and things like that, but do we intentionally take the time to learn about relationship and how to connect and how to meet relational needs and all that stuff. So we're teaching a language, we're talking about intentionality, and so today the goal is to really walk through these things just one by one. They're listed here next to me. We have different posters. We'll actually spend some time on an activity tonight with it too. But again, the idea is just to kind of slow down for a second and look at what are the relational needs and how do we meet them. So these are actually, there are different kinds of, you'll find if you just start looking at what are relational needs, what does that really mean? There, you may find different kinds of wordings or explanations or whatever. These are based on Dr. John Townsend's list and information that he puts out, and then we've worked with him and we've kind of developed our own language around it to put it in ways that we can use, that the girls can really digest and understand, and the parents can kind of grasp a hold of. He actually is working on a new book right now that will cover this stuff too, so I don't even know like exactly when that will come out, but he's adding more meat to it, even in terms of like different quadrants of where these relational needs fall, because you'll notice as we go through it that there is a hierarchy of relational needs, and we'll start with the very basic and kind of work up to kind of that more higher level of relational needs. So he kind of dives into things like that that will come out in the book as well. So behind me you can see that list, and so we'll walk through. One of the things I like to point out at some point, when you think about underlying needs that drive behavior, one of the things maybe we talk about without even realizing or thinking about it is that we use the language of looking for attention. And when you think about how often you've thought that about your girls or other teenagers or yourself even at a certain time, we think about it in terms of the behavior is driven by this need for attention. And that feels really true. You look at somebody and go, man, they're just looking for attention. Well, attention in and of itself isn't a relational need. You'll not find it on this list. So what is it that's really driving that need or that desire for attention that we perceive? What's really the need underneath it? So I would challenge you as you think about that and look back and go, man, what were the situations in our family dynamic and in my daughter's life that we would have said, man, she was looking for attention. And really as we go through the list, think, man, maybe she was looking for one of these other things, and it was kind of hard to really identify, and she wouldn't have been able to put it into words, and maybe you wouldn't have been able to like see it in that way at the time or something. But just as you look at that list, begin to think about those different things. So the first one is acceptance. And like I said, it's just the very basic. When you think about our desire for love and belonging, that crucial human longing, this is it. And this is where at our very basic, and that's why it's on the kind of basic core level of these relational needs, is we want to know that we can be accepted for who we are without judgment. And that doesn't mean that as a relational need, we need everybody to accept us as we are, and we need to find that acceptance in every relationship, but it means that we need to know that on some level we are acceptable, that we can be loved and accepted without judgment for who we are. Some of these things, when you think about that, one of the hang-ups that we can get into with that is we feel like that means that if my daughter is looking for acceptance from me, that means that she's looking for acceptance of all of her behaviors and all of the things I disapprove of, and that she feels like I don't accept her because I'm really not accepting the behaviors or some of these certain, maybe even self-destructive paths that she's on. And I think that that's the challenge as a parent and in relationship and in general, is how do I communicate this acceptance without judgment and all of that, without necessarily meaning that all of the behavior is okay too. So where do you go with that? What do you do? Part of it is, as we go through the weekend, just keep that in your minds and think about, we're going to talk tomorrow about attunement and creating the experience in the other person, that you are with them, that you're for them, and that you can feel what they're feeling, and you can even on some level kind of address what it is that is driving them, what need is driving them. So begin to kind of let that settle in a little bit of, how do I really create that sense of I accept you even when I don't accept your behaviors. So kind of think about that as an important part. So empathy then is to feel like someone else knows on an experiential level what you're going through. And so When you think about that and the difference between, you'll notice sympathy isn't necessarily here, though you can kind of put that into different compartments. Sympathy is kind of like, I feel bad for you, you're going through something tough, I feel bad for you. Empathy is more creating that experience in someone that you can really connect to that part of that feeling in yourself that has been there. And so if I am, I have this relational need for empathy, I need to know that someone else out there can feel what I'm feeling. And that's driving me to do something or to seek someone or whatever, is I've got to know that someone else can understand and feel what I'm feeling. I do want, afterward, we're going to kind of work through some of these things. I'm going to give you some sheets and stuff that I'll explain as we get there. But in the meantime, I'm going to go through these and just kind of flesh them out and explain kind of a little bit of what each one is really driving at. But so validation, to be reassured by others that your feelings matter and are significant. This is one, I love this stuff. Like, this stuff just, I've seen it like open up people's minds to like when they really start to think through what all these different things mean, and then as they really like they do the worksheet that we're going to do and they begin to like look at all this stuff, it like opens up their mind, and then they're like, oh my word, like I am looking for validation, like that's what I need. And you begin to really understand and comprehend like what that means, that you recognize inside of yourself when there's distress, when there is maybe even feelings of loneliness, sadness, or whatever. You're like, wow, I never knew that that's what that feeling was, but I needed validation. So validation just being that I need somebody outside of myself to look on my experience and go, man, it makes sense that you'd feel that way. And again, with this, and this is something that, we challenge parents to, like, as you think about this language and you recognize that, or maybe your daughter says, I've learned this stuff, I just needed you to validate me, and it doesn't mean necessarily, hey, your behavior that you're doing right now is great. It's different than that, but it's saying, man, I can kind of get why you would feel that way. It doesn't even mean I agree with you, and it doesn't mean I would feel that way. It doesn't mean I do feel that way, but it's kind of saying you're not crazy. Like, if I were going through that, maybe I would feel that way. I can get where you're coming from, but just somebody outside of yourself to observe and say, yeah, like it makes sense that you would feel that way, and that matters. That in a way, what you're feeling and the way that you're internalizing what's going on around you, that's okay. That matters. That's significant. Identification, to feel that others can relate to your feelings and experience. How many times, like, you saw it today when Elena was sharing the first student that raised her hand, and the first couple, that was kind of what they were saying, is like, oh, I needed to hear this today because I'm leaving today, and I needed to know that you've sat in the seat, you've been in my experience, in my situation, and that it can turn out okay, and that it's okay if I'm not perfect, and all that stuff. So that idea of somebody looking on, knowing where you're at and identifying with your situation and your experience and your feelings. Containment, this is probably my favorite. To be able to express intense feelings to others and be confident that they will stand by you and not try to fix you or leave you. So I love this because it kind of takes what feels irrational and feels pointless and it feels really difficult about relationship and helps to make some sense out of it. So this is, to me, the best example of this, or where you might experience it the most. Maybe it is your relationship with your daughter, but sometimes you can even relate to it in a marriage relationship where, like, one of you, I know in my relationship with Emily, a lot of times it works out that one of us is having a bad day, the other one is like doing okay, and like a lot of times it's not like we're both having a bad day at the same time or both having a great day at the same time, but sometimes like there's balancing each other out. But when the one person is having a really bad day and they just need to like vent or express, or they're just like sharing like, oh, this is what my day was like, but and then the other person who's like on top of the world that day is just like, oh, you're just like, just don't dwell on that, or, like, let's look at the bright side, or, just like, or they like take it on and can't handle that anger or that frustration, and so now we've got fireworks or whatever. But basically, the one who's like really struggling and like just needing to like share that information, it just kind of creates fireworks, or they feel like you don't understand, you're just kind of like shutting me down or whatever. But what this idea of containment is that you can share your intense emotion and where you're at right now, and it doesn't mean it's like free license to like scream at me and cuss at me and be disrespectful, but it's this idea that like you can tolerate my intensity right now and my emotion and where I'm at, and just kind of hold on to that with me for a second, not take it on. It's not yours, it's mine. And actually, after we kind of like, I share that with you and talk about it, you'll kind of hand it back to me. In a way, sometimes I illustrate this where like I'm holding an empty cup, and someone comes to me and they're like sharing, they're venting, they're spewing or whatever, and they pour that liquid into my cup, and they're sharing it, they're venting, they're spewing or whatever, and I'm kind of holding on to that. And I'm like, wow, that sounds really hard. That is tough. And you know what? I'm not taking it on. I'm not getting worked up. I'm not freaking out. It doesn't scare me. It doesn't pull me away or push me away. And in the end of it, as I'm going, man, that sounds tough, I pour it back into the other person's glass. And they're like, yeah, it is. And I can deal with it. Like, I'm okay. And we'll move on. But I needed to like get that out of myself and share it with another human being who could kind of contain that with me. Containment is what we do as parents when our children are in the infancy stage. When they're screaming and they're terrified, they don't know what's going on, or maybe it's just, they need fed or whatever, but that's how they express their need, is through crying or having, intensity. Mom or dad holds them, says, it's okay, like, we'll be all right, I'm going to get you what you need. And the baby learns, like, okay, I'm safe, they can handle my intense emotion, they can handle my anger, versus what if mom and dad, like when the baby cried, just freak out and explode or whatever. So think about that in your relationship, whether it's a marriage relationship or your relationship with your child. What if, when there is intense emotion, and again, it doesn't mean that there's no boundaries to how that's handled, you can still contain somebody's emotion and intensity without just having free reign of hit me, punch me, yell at me, cuss at me, whatever. It doesn't mean that. But it's the idea of, are you able to contain their intensity without it pushing you away, driving you away from the relationship? In the world, when she's angry and I can be present and hold that with her, not take it on, but when I can't hold that with her, it's about me, not really her. Like, it's about my lack of comfort with the expression of anger, or what that makes me feel, makes me scared or uncomfortable or whatever, so I tend to shut that down, try to put a silver lining on it or whatever. But what does that do to the other person? It communicates, I'm not okay when I'm angry. They don't accept my angry parts. And so what do? I've got to hide that. I've got to like keep that buried. I've got to keep a lid on it or whatever. And when we do that, when we keep a lid on any part of ourselves and keep it out of relationship, what happens? It grows in its toxicity. It grows in its almost cancer in a way, because it doesn't have the healing light of relationship, right? It's buried and then it's hidden and it becomes deader. And so that's what we want, is we want them to be able to bring those things to us in a relationship where they can have that healing light. So
containment, but the slippery slope is how to be empathetic without fueling the fire.
Yeah.
So that's where I have trouble with containment, is like not getting in there.
Right.
But then you don't want to seem cold and be like, oh, that's really sad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and we'll talk more about it and go through the actual attunement or ABD skills tomorrow. That kind of helps. And so that'll put a little bit of practice to it, because you're right, that is what's so hard. But a lot of times it's simpler in a way than we think in terms of like what the person really needs from us. I feel like one of the biggest things that I gained even here, I've worked here for years, even before Compass Rose, and did a lot of like crisis response on call, and so you're always dealing when somebody's really upset and when there's like a crisis or whatever. And so one of the biggest things that I found to be really effective when you're going into that is, they may be, and obviously they're in crisis, they're exploding, they're upset or whatever, and so they're like just kind of unleashing in terms of what they're feeling and going through. And so imagine how if my response is like, well, either just stop it and start doing what you're supposed to, or I could like egg it on and like, make it worse if I'm like, get super angry or whatever. But really, statements, something that is like, man, that does sound hard. Is there anything else? Like inviting more. Like when you think about it's overwhelming to you and you think nobody else can handle it, but yet then somebody comes in and calmly validates by saying, man, that does sound hard, and yet then communicates that, you know what, I can even handle more. Almost like, what else you got? Tell me more. Like, sounds like this is rough. And sometimes what's funny is their next response isn't another 10-minute tirade. It's like a deep breath. It's like, I think that was everything, or like I just got it all out. But you communicating that like I can handle more, and that sounds really hard. Those types of things, like when you think about, but a lot of times we make it a lot more complicated because we're like, what do I say? How do I do this? I need to like tell them the right thing to do. And we jump to down here where we're trying to give advice and challenge and correct and structure, when it's like, whoa, stay back up here. Let's hold it with them for a second before we start telling them what to do and how to fix their problem. So any other kind of thoughts or before I say that, one of the things, like when we've given this to people and they there's like an assessment, and I've seen people where even in their marriage like that like puts language to it, and they're like, oh my word, I realized this was my number one thing that I needed, and I went home and talked about it with my husband and explained that like this is where I'm at the end of a day when I've had a rough day, and I'm like just trying to share with you where I'm at, and it comes out in all of its intensity. I just need you to like be there and hold it with me, and not like tell me advice or tell me to get over it or tell me what I did wrong that led to me to feel that way. Like, I just need you to like be in it with me for a moment or whatever. So beginning to kind of put language to seeing what that is, that's that need underneath. Clarification, to better understand yourself by answering others' questions that lead to self-awareness. So some people just naturally are kind of better at different ones of these, where some people just have an ability to really like process and be introspective and kind of think through things in their relationships and like connect dots, and other people are like, man, I couldn't see it, or I don't process that way or whatever. And so some people really need to be processing with people and have somebody outside of themselves kind of ask the right questions. This is sometimes where therapy comes in, that, we challenge everybody, be in therapy, be like, working on your own growth and stuff so that you're strong enough in your marriage and your parenting and who you are to be able to handle the difficulties of raising a teenager and all that stuff. But so sometimes just kind of processing out loud with a friend or therapist or safe person and having somebody that asks those right questions that helps you connect the dots. So that's clarification. Understanding, acceptance that someone can appreciate and acknowledge what you're going through. Sometimes this is shown by reflecting back to you what you just said. So again, something that we'll talk about tomorrow, but kind of that sense of somebody else outside of me really can comprehend and understand what I'm going through, and I get that by somebody kind of putting it back in their own words and really sharing, and so it creates that sense inside of you that like, yes, they get it, they know what I'm going through, I'm not crazy, that type of thing. Perspective, allowing someone else to help you see a connection between your situation and a pattern in your life. Again, sometimes when just inside ourselves, we may just be like, man, I keep having this issue, or we're complaining about this, or we're expressing that. But inside of ourselves, we can't always connect the dots and see like, oh, this is a pattern and it keeps happening to me because of choices that I'm making or positions I'm putting myself in or whatever. And so somebody outside of ourselves that can help us kind of connect those dots and see those patterns or themes in our lives. Thinking of, there's somebody, one of the girls recently just shared that she was like, man, my mom used to tell me this, like about a relationship in my life, and I like didn't see it. I didn't believe her. I thought she was wrong, and I kept wanting to do my own thing. And now looking back, I can see that relationship was bad and toxic. But in the moment, and this is what I loved like hearing her say, is like it was like her blinders were off. Like I can see it now, and I really couldn't then. Like, and so it took kind of, even in a way, stepping out here and seeing different relational patterns and kind of opening up with the girls to really look at that and with new, fresh eyes and see, man, mom was saying and trying to point it out, but I could not hear it, couldn't see it. That perspective, that is one that we see a lot here, where like a lot of times when girls come in, they say, man, my parents are the strictest parents in the world. They have the worst expectations. They expect me to be perfect, and they don't let me do anything that my friends' parents let them do, and all that stuff. And so it is like that's their perspective. That's like their world, the way they see it. And then they come here and kind of like, as they are in this situation and talk through things, that perspective changes, and they're like, man, my parents are strict, and they're not overly strict. They're not the strictest parents in the world. They're not trying to make me miserable, and they can kind of begin to see from a different perspective why my parents have expectations and boundaries and all that stuff. Encouragement, to be reassured when someone expresses belief in you and confidence that you have what it takes to keep growing. So we kind of know what encouragement is, but sometimes maybe we don't have that intentionality to go, oh man, I am feeling discouraged. I am feeling maybe hopeless or down on myself. I need encouragement. And you know what? I'm not going to wait for somebody else to just encourage me, or I'm not going to just kind of like passively kind of go looking for it. I'm going to, with intentionality, say this to my spouse, call a safe person, call my best friend, whatever, and say, man, I am super discouraged. I'm feeling down on myself, and I think I just need to hear that you believe in me or that you see good in me. Can you just talk to me for 5 minutes and tell me something that hopeful? So again, just think about it in this language, and maybe that's something that you can recognize in your daughter, or ask, hey, it sounds like that you could use encouragement. Do you mind if I just kind of speak some encouragement into you right now? But again, just think with intentionality, not waiting for other people. Comfort, to accept someone's care and concern when you need to grieve a loss. Kind of looking at that as something that is okay, to not feel like you have to grieve or face hardship on your own, but that you can go to someone with intentionality when you're facing a loss. And that, think about it, put yourself in the other position of giving comfort. Typically, when we give comfort, although it can be hard to feel like we have to say the right words or whatever, it feels good to give comfort and to know that you were there for someone in a time of need when they needed it. But when we put it on ourselves, we're like, I don't want to be like an imposition, I don't want to make them feel bad, or I don't want to put them out. But just thinking in terms of, man, this is a real need that I have, and I can go to someone intentionally and ask for comfort and have that need met. To understand that someone can pardon you for something by giving you grace, and that you can also forgive by giving grace to others. This is one that really struck me. I'm trying to think if I can even put it into words exactly, but this was one that when I went through the training, went through a year of training with Townsend, and then 2 years after that with like his executive director, and just kind of hearing that information, and this one in particular, the idea that we can extend forgiveness to other people and feel forgiveness from other people really struck me. Because a lot of times we think of it as like, when we think of forgiveness, maybe a lot of times we think even in terms of spiritually and asking God for forgiveness and salvation, like we can understand it in that context. And we can understand if I hurt someone and directly extend forgiveness to them or ask for forgiveness. I think what stood out to me in this way is the idea of a relational need where I can go to other people with my need to feel forgiveness, even if they're not the one that wronged me. So sometimes we carry around this shame of like, I did something bad, I screwed up, I've not been good enough, or I've let people down. And this idea that we can extend that forgiveness, or I can have that underlying need met through other people. And even biblically, that idea that we are grace bearers, we are image bearers, we are bestowers of God's grace to others. And so that as people like stand before us and say, man, I have like been a horrible person, I've done this or that, or I'm just carrying this like weight or shame, to be able to say that to another person and for them to kind of say, man, you know what, like I get it, and that's okay. You don't have to carry around, like, I don't look down on you for who you are. I don't look down on you for what you've done. There is forgiveness for that. Like, you don't have to carry that around the rest of your life because of what you've done. And so just that idea of like being able to go to other people when we have this sense of like, have you ever done that where you're like, man, I have been carrying this weight around because I feel so awful for the things that I've done. And then you share it with people and they're like, yeah, me too, or I've done that, or I get it, or that's okay. Like, so anyway, just kind of that sense of being able to experience grace in relationship with other people when we get that off of our chest instead of just carrying that around. That is a huge one that even girls here experience, just that sense of carrying around the weight of shame of things that they've done or have been done to them, and kind of feeling like, okay, I don't have to carry that around. Feedback. For someone to be honest with you. So here you can start to feel the shift that we're going to transition more into the more like higher level of like when I feel like I have been accepted and people empathize with me and I'm validated and I'm more secure in my relationships and all of that. Then I can feel strong enough to seek out some of these next things. So feedback is for someone to be honest with you about what it's like to be with you. This is how I experience you. This is what it's like to be in relationship with you. This helps you develop the ability to see yourself accurately. You need grace from people before they give you this truth. And so that's kind of in there as a way of saying like, this is sort of a transition of like, you're not going to go around asking people for feedback if you don't really have that sense of like connection or acceptance from them. But when you do, you can ask for really valuable input. Right now with the girls, we're doing affirmations and challenges where in the groups they say to one another, here's something that I see in you that speaking that kind of like affirmation of the positive, and then also here's how I challenge you, and it might be a way of saying like, this is how I experience you in relationship, and that's valuable information to know what it's like to be in relationship with you. Wisdom, to be receptive when someone shares information with you, either from life experience from the Bible that can be helpful when confronting certain situations or people. So again, this is kind of where that comes in of like being able to speak truth and to share that wisdom. Parents have lots of wisdom and we're really eager to share it, and a lot of times we want to jump to that, but it's very valuable. Confrontation, for someone to be honest enough with you to point out a behavior that's going to end up hurting you. Especially when you think about your adult relationships right now. Hopefully you are somewhat feeling like you are secure in who you are, and so how active are you in seeking out people that will confront you when you need it, that will kind of push you outside of your comfort zone if they see you going down a path that's not best, or that they see kind of the negative impact. Advice, someone's recommendations for you to help you change and grow. Structure, a pattern of living overseen by another person that provides accountability and discipline to help you break bad habits, set new patterns of behavior, and develop self-control. So intentionality around some people, this may be where you thrive in terms of like living in structure and organization and patterns and kind of setting that up. Or you might need someone else to help you develop discipline. Discipline isn't something that necessarily comes from just inside of ourselves, but discipline a lot of times starts out outside of ourselves. People who are able to help us set good boundaries, hold us accountable, so to speak. So this is one, again, of intentionality of structure in your life. Who helps you to hold structure? The last two, prayer, to join with someone to connect to God, experience His grace, and ask for His help in dealing with life situations. So to actually be with someone else in connecting to God, and someone else who will be there with you in that intimacy of seeking the Lord together and asking for help through relationship and with God. And then the last one, challenge, for someone to push you out of your comfort zone and show you what you're really capable of. So again, the more secure we are in relationship, the more we can put ourselves out there with relationship with others and really seek with intentionality somebody that will challenge us and push us.